party people. I'm Katie.
And I'm Caitlin.
And this is the Who Has Time for This podcast, a podcast where we delve into complex issues through the lens of our own unique perspectives.
All right. Our first episode ever, we are looking at the topic of nuance and where it exists today, if at all.
Spoiler alert.
It does not.
It doesn't.
So welcome to the Death of Nuance. Let's start with a definition. What is nuance? Essentially, it's the context that gives meaning to a current circumstance or situation. Issue of lack of nuance comes at a time when all the information in the world is available to us on the internet, and yet we as a society are not, doing our own due diligence to research topics that we hear on the news or on social media, and we just don't want to have complex discussions. We can't tolerate not knowing something definitively. We just want swift and all-encompassing pronouncements and move on to the next news cycle. So my experience as a former journalist, I learned in school that if it bleeds, it leads. So what does this mean? Basically, any headline that's going to grab viewers, or at the time, newspaper readers, is going to be front and center. There's going to be little context. It's just the example that they used to use was headless body and topless bar, about somebody who was murdered at a bar, early 1900s, late 1800s. Yeah. And if it bleeds, it leads. So think about that. That's how you sold newspapers. So fast forward to
that was in the 1800s, you said?
It's probably early 1900s.
So way before the 24-hour news cycle.
Way before the 24-hour news cycle. Just literally newspapers, how you sold a print newspaper back in the day. And so fast forward now to the era of 24/7 news and the uprising of Fox News and MSNBC and the left and the right ecosphere. Everybody's got to come up with some sort of clickbait, outrage bait angle, and a lot of that has to do with removing all context from a situation, headline, soundbite, etc., and just pushing out the most extreme idea imaginable.
So when I was thinking about nuance and the news, my mind immediately went to, the news can sometimes mislead people to more incendiary and simple conclusions to things like showing misleading data. So a graph that has, an X and a Y axis that are just not consistent. So when I was looking for this kind of stuff, because I know I've seen it before, I found this one graph that was the deaths due to COVID-19. One of the axes that was showing the numbers, they didn't just go up by 50s. It went 30, 60, 90, 100, 130, 160, 190, 240, 250, 300, 350, 400. There's just no way that graph is actually showing the shape.
Right.
The correct shape. So people are looking at this and seeing a totally distorted view from the 3 seconds it's shown on the screen. And then there's all these other ways that the news can, show us information that's incomplete or misleading, as simple as showing a clip of Elon Musk saying all of these people over 150 years old are accepting Social Security checks, but then not mentioning that that's incorrect. Or having experts on the show, but they might be an expert, or they might just be a pundit who is technically just a person who gives an opinion in an authoritative manner. They can be an expert, but they're not always. So knowing who you're watching on the news and if they actually know what they are talking about, or if they just sound like they know what they're talking about.
Yep. And going back to what I said before about we don't want complex discussions and we can't tolerate not knowing something definitively, when people come on a TV show or on the radio or in a social media clip and they are just definitively this is that and X is Z and etc., and they're just saying it like it's matter of fact and they sound knowledgeable, they sound authoritative, we're just going to accept that as fact because we just want to know the answer and move on, and we don't dive deeper to try to find the context, the trade-offs, the discussion of benefits versus the cons, etc. So that is what has been plaguing, in my opinion, our whole news industry, and it's something that we need to work on, and we need to push these, especially legacy media that we follow, to do better and start tuning in to the people who are mastering social media, they're mastering the news cycle of these independent journalists. I can think of a few that I can name right now Jessica Yellen is one, who dive under the headline and offer 360-degree view of a topic that you might not hear a deeper conversation about on ABC or in the New York Times, etc.
Absolutely.
So, yes, the long and short of this is that the 24 hours news cycle and the social media algorithms that help propel our news cycle in our day-to-day lives, they prioritize engagement over accuracy, and the most emotionally charged content is going to get the most attention. And that leads us into our next part of this discussion, which is about nuance around politics.
Woo!
All right, so talking about nuance or lack thereof in politics. No one has quite mastered this phenomenon the way that Donald Trump has. Honestly, we got to give him credit where credit is due. He's kind of a genius at it.
It sucks.
It does suck. He's the master of messaging. I don't know if he understands. I mean, I'm sure he understands it, but he's just really good at it. So he will inherently put his finger on a pain point and then spew out some simple, made for social media and soundbite messaging that lacks all the context, but it becomes a talking point, and then it's repeated over and over and over and over again by MAGA, by the news stations covering him, by the well-intended journalists that are trying to get in on the conversation too, until it becomes truth, essentially. And in this polarized climate, outrage fuels engagement, which fuels talking points on 24/7 cable networks. It just gets picked up, and it just becomes the news story of the day. And then any context that you try to add to the story, you will get accused of being partisan. That is like a big problem that has plagued a lot of the legacy newspapers, like especially like New York Times is one I follow or subscribe to, which yes, I know is left-leaning, but ever since the rise of Trump in 2015, 2016, and Fox News obviously has been a big problem for our legacy media friends since the 90s. Anytime you try to draw connections, newspapers get accused of being too leftist or too partisan. It's like, well, is it just the truth, though?
I was just going to say, when they're just bringing up what the actual data and facts are saying. So Donald Trump's, solid grasp on killing nuance is really, a great benefit to his party above the Democratic Party or, whoever is
It floats your boat.
opposed.
Yeah.
So, when you look at the current Democratic Party, you have people like Bernie Sanders is technically an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats because that's the only choice right now. We've got a two-party system. But you look at Bernie and a Nancy Pelosi and a Joe Biden, they all have to be on the same party, even though they have such varied, past and present political stances. But the Republicans have killed nuance so effectively that they are all a fully united unit behind Donald Trump. And so the Democratic Party is remaining varied on so many different points, and it's appearing disconnected to the people. So they're not rallying behind their political leaders the way that MAGA, followers are rallying behind Trump.
Exactly. Yep. And, Democrats, they tend to be, we're accused of being cultural elitists, coastal elitists, whatever, which there are certainly times when that is true, and it's part of why we lost the election. But sometimes you got to talk about stuff, and you got to talk about the details, and you got to get all the points across. Otherwise, we're left with garbage. One thing that comes to mind is the tariff conversation. And as we are recording this, we're about to enter the auto tariff situation, and this is a big one that lacks context. He just keeps saying it's gonna make America the golden age, and we're in the golden age, and it's gonna be great again, and we're gonna make every auto manufacturer build cars here. And okay, I get it. That's great in theory, I guess. But where are these factories going to be built? Are they ready now? How much time is this going to take?
How are you going to get the materials to build these factories when you're putting
everything's
tariffs on Canada and Mexico?
Exactly. How long is it going to take for these investments that any particular company has said that they may make in the United States? When is it going to come to fruition? How long are these tariffs going to be in place? Are cars going to cost $3,000 to $10,000 more than they do right now for 10 years before we start to see relief? What is the plan? these are the things that require context and nuanced discussion. But all we hear is that tariff is a beautiful word, the most beautiful word in the English language. And people are like, yeah, tariffs, making everything in America. And then the cost to the everyday consumer is not discussed. It is discussed by the media organizations that try to bring nuance to the conversation, and then they are accused of being negative and not wanting America to be great again. And you see where this is going. One news story that is like near and dear to my heart when I talk about the death of nuance is the rise and fall of Build Back Better. So I need you to think back to 2021, 2022. Joe Biden was president. Democrats had control of the House and Senate. There was a lot of potential to push through a big reform. And that came in the package of Build Back Better, which was called multiple different names. It was like the American Families Act, the American Jobs Act, but colloquially it was Build Back Better, and it would have, in my opinion, improved life for so many middle class and working class people in the long run, with universal free pre-K, tuition-free community college, Medicare expansion to dental and vision and hearing, 12 weeks of paid family leave for everybody, federally mandated, and expanded child tax credits. So, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer for me, especially being a mother of two. I was really intrigued by the universal pre-K, which would save me 2 to 3 years of daycare payments. I was all for it. I was like, how can anybody not see how great this would be? Which I guess in itself might be an unnuanced opinion, but I was really...
We are not immune.
No, we are not immune. And then I just assumed it would pass. Like, we had control of everything. Our president was Democratic. Congress was Democratic. And yet the news cycle about this bill begins, and it went a little bit like this. It was painted as something that would cost $4.1 trillion and add to the deficit, and this and that, and the way that we were going to pay for it would be to tax billionaires and corporations.
Woo!
Yeah. And then this point became illustrated as punishing the wealthy for their success and making them have to pay for everybody else. And that was the narrative that was pushed. Punishing success. Funding Build Back Better and other socialist ideas was punishing success if you were going to increase the taxes on billionaires and corporations. Now, that was the headline everywhere. It's like $4.1 trillion, tax billionaires, tax corporations. And if you took the time to read below the headline, below the breaking news alerts, just like read a story. You could read the story on your paper of choice. New York Times, National Review for normal Republicans, conservatives, non-MAGA, I should say, get a well-rounded opinion. So anyway, it doesn't end up passing to its full potential. And now, a couple years later, I'm listening to the Money with Katie podcast, and she did a deep dive about what went wrong here. And I didn't know this because, again, the news cycle back in the day was all about punishing success of billionaires and corporations at the expense of everyday Americans. And I learned that the actual tax rates that they were proposing that got lost among the fray would have been a corporate tax rate that went from 21 to 28%. So like it's barely anything. Like, you would have thought we were taxing them at 99% the way that the outrage went.
I feel like I pay like 30% of my income in taxes.
Exactly.
And God.
This in itself, this 28% was 20% lower than it was in the 1990s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, and 40% lower than the corporate tax rate in the 80s, which I'm pretty sure is somewhere around where America was great and where we want to get back to. So what's up with that? And then they would have raised the top marginal tax rate for earners making more than around $600,000 a year from 37% to 39.6%. So literally 2.6% more. And we couldn't do that. We couldn't get this passed through Congress with, nope. I was very upset when I heard this because you know what? Having universal pre-K would save me, a average middle-class American, $16,000 to $30,000 a year. And I'm pretty sure that Elon Musk could pay $2.9 2.6% more, and Tesla could pay 7% more in taxes. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
these
pretty sure
people
they'd
who
be
have
okay.
never had to give a thought to childcare.
Yeah. Yep.
Because
and that's a whole other
that's never been an
conversation
issue, yeah.
that we will have another time. But my point is that the whole storyline became it costs too much and we shouldn't have to punish the success of billionaires and corporations and the wealthiest 1% of the nation by taxing them to pay for this social safety net reform and package, however you want to call it. And it didn't go through. And I think that's a huge shame.
So back to our guy, Donald J. Trump. He has set an example for people to really never admit that they're wrong, never grow and learn from their mistakes. Now he's showing people you can dig your heels in and not pay attention to any contrary facts you hear and defend the points of view that you have that can be completely false. It's making people lose those skills to engage in critical conversations and admit your mistakes. You know, it's already really difficult to change your mind or admit you've been wrong or at least partially wrong about something, but it's becoming like this impossible task now for so many people. You know, our brains help us to jump through whatever sort of logistical fallacy hoops we have to so that we don't have to confront the actuality of being wrong because it doesn't feel nice to be wrong. And this leads to like lack of critical thinking skills. Like even, you know, just taking what you hear and not looking into what the words actually mean. Like transgenic mice. That doesn't mean that they're turning mice transgender. Like because the word trans is in the
Yeah, let me tell you, the word trans is also in transatlantic. It means going from one side of the ocean to the other.
Transport.
Transport, yeah.
Anyway, but it isn't just, you know, the MAGA, the Trump followers that are losing this nuance. Social media has provided
a
landscape for all types of people to thrive on this oversimplification of complex issues. So it's both a conservative and a liberal, and wherever you identify on that spectrum, it's an issue that affects everybody. Like, you know, essentially when you squish a complex idea into like 120 characters, you smush it into this little simplified metaphor so you can throw out a quick post. Like I have a specific tweet. Hold on, I gotta find it so I can read it. Scott Walker, who is a governor of Wisconsin, he wrote, explaining tax rates before Reagan to fifth graders. Imagine if you did chores for your grandma and she gave you $10. When you got home, your parents took $7 from you. The student said that's not fair. Even fifth graders get it. And AOC sent like a really great reply where she tore him down. But, you know, that's not how taxes work. You know, smushing this really complex topic of taxation down and into 120 characters, it's just not true.
It's just not true. And going back to the Build Back Better conversation, his math is not even correct. So $7 would be 70% of your $10. And as I just discussed, we're not going over 40% at any point for the top 1% of earners or the largest corporations. So, just stop. Just stop. With and these lies and this misinformation and this turning the truth on its head. You need context, you need nuance, and tweets and X is not the place for it, or apparently anywhere else, and that's what we're trying to fix.
And like taking these, you know, complex issues and turning them into one or the other, it's making the false dilemma fallacy, you know, pop up all over the place, and I'm sure you've seen it. So it like misrepresents an issue by presenting that there's only two mutually exclusive options rather than like this full nuanced range of options. So like if you've seen like those reaction posts, like someone, I don't know, making like a Pride Month post, and then someone's like, oh, you must not support this Marine who died in combat. It's like, why can't you support both?
Right.
You know, like, or somebody like posting a picture of a vacation they took because they're having a good time. And somebody else is like, how could you so selfishly go on this trip when there's a war in Ukraine? Like, can't both those things happen at the same time? Can't you go on vacation and also have feelings about the war in Ukraine? Like,
people, this is nuance, but it's also just like a conversation about how we live our life in this day and age. Yes, there's a war going on in Ukraine. Yes, terrible things are happening. People are being just disappeared off the street right now because Trump doesn't like something that they protested about, and they may or may not have been born in the USA. We don't know. All that terrible stuff is happening, and yet we still have to live our lives. So it's okay to go on vacation and take your kid to preschool
And care about two causes at the same time.
Yep.
Two things can be true.
Two things can be true at once. Yes, exactly. So while I was doing some research for the podcast, I came across a tweet or a thread. I'm never really sure where these things are coming from anymore, by somebody named Jaron Myers. And he said, "It takes 5 seconds to tweet a lie, but an 8-minute explainer to get to the truth of an issue. And that's why we're here." And that's exactly it. Trump and Elon can just tweet out their truth socials and their lies, and they get picked up and spirited away into the minds and hearts of everybody who passes by a phone or TV, and it spreads like wildfire in seconds. And then you got Chris Murphy coming in with a 5-minute video of him sitting at his kitchen telling what the real story is, and that also, gets a lot of views, but like it's not the same, doesn't have the same traction. That's why we are in these crazy...
You made me think of something, bringing up Chris Murphy making an explainer video in his kitchen. Last month or so, like sometime in February, I think. I forget what was passing, but like a lot of House Dems were like, Chris Murphy was up speaking to the House from, he said like 2 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
Up all night.
Filibustering.
Yes.
I
forget what the specific cause was. But he then posted like a video, like how he was making a cocktail for himself. He made a pink cocktail to kind of, I don't know, find a little bit of joy in life, like relax a little bit, and made a video like to put on social media of him drinking his cocktail. And The Daily Show, which I love The Daily Show, it's a great watch, but they used that clip of him making a cocktail to show that Democrats were not doing anything. They were sitting at home in their kitchens drinking cocktails, when it's like he drank that cocktail because he was up till 5 a.m. filibustering.
Yeah.
So he was working, and it's just like...
And he was taking his message to his followers in a fun way.
Yeah.
Because he had to break through the noise somehow.
It's not a partisan issue. Like, everybody does it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
we all have a little treat at the end of a long day. And here he was, coming to show us what he had and his senator friends had been doing all night, so that it wasn't lost on people that they are fighting back. The filibuster was an example of that, and he was just trying something on social to break through the noise, and like now all the Democrats are doing their little videos, and some of them are good, some of them aren't good, but they're trying to break through the noise and get to the people in a way that they haven't yet. So we'll see what happens there.
Sorry to derail your train of thought.
No, that's fine. I mean, the same goes for us. This is our first episode, and we're doing our best, and we will keep working on it so that it becomes a discussion that everybody wants to listen to.
You better want to listen to it.
But yeah, so social media, not the greatest place for complexity and nuance, and yet it is where all of our discussions take place. I do want to give an example of like what I think is one of those social media posts that your aunt shares because her friend shared it, and it probably was written by some hacker in Russia because it's just like doesn't make any sense. But it's one of those things that gets passed around, and then like everything in it is like the truth, and if you're against it, then you're anti-American and blah blah blah. And it's one of those examples that truly blends everything together. How lack of nuance infiltrates the news, our politics, and then is just like all on display on social media. I was sent this particular social media post by a family member, and it started with Democrats and liberals, calling all Democrats and liberals, let me tell you everything that you're wrong about type of posts. And it followed the logic that all the terrible things that it listed happened under Joe Biden. And during this time when he was president, the left said nothing. So I'll just give you 3. There were like, honestly, at least 30 little phrases. When X happened, the left said nothing. When X happened, you said nothing, etc. So this first one was, when they passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that failed miserably, you said nothing. Okay, let's take a step back here. So that's just the whole pronouncement. Number one, it passed, so I don't know how it failed miserably. The funding was in the middle of being dispersed. I mean, I don't know about you, Katie, but every time I drive on 95, I see like 10 signs that say this project is being funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Oh yeah, and let me just go back one more second. It was a bipartisan bill that passed. So it did pass. Pass, fail, two different things. The funding was being dispersed. Unfortunately, anything that had yet to be dispersed is possibly not going to happen now because of Trump, like, overstepping his boundaries as president and trying to reroute funds and everything crazy that's going on right now. So yeah, maybe it will fail ultimately, but that wasn't the intention of the bill that passed. The House and Senate. It didn't
fail at the point of this meme being made.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I have to ask, what is the definition of failing? Because your argument is failing that. When they shut down our energy production and emboldened Russia, you said nothing.
Oh my God.
Okay, this one is a doozy. So, as we all know, climate change is real. And we're trying to move to renewable energy and, really not rely on oil and gas, etc. That was a big deal for the Biden administration. And yet, crude oil production actually hit record growth under Biden. But it wasn't something that we talked about because it kind of goes in direct conflict with the push toward green energy. So Biden wasn't about to go on the news and be like, yes, crude oil is up and I love it because there's going to be people on the left who are like, he did love it. Like, it's a whole thing. But I guess my point is that the fact is crude oil was up during Biden, and whether he wanted it to be or not.
That's nuance that wasn't explored. Like, just because he's a Democrat doesn't mean he didn't, help with oil production.
Yeah.
Like,
so it was up, and that's the truth. And you can read about this like anywhere, just Google it. But I saw it on a piece in Reuters. Just Google crude oil, Biden, and you will see many fact-based, nonpartisan results come up. So, and then putting sanctions on Russia did not embolden them, and the invasion by Russia of Ukraine caused oil and gas prices to spike, which was actually great for oil executives of the world. They made a lot of money. I'm not a fan of that. It's just what happened. And let's talk about this second part, emboldened Russia. So how did we embolden Russia? So Russia is categorically weaker than it was on February 21st, 2022, or I forgot what day, February 23rd, the day before they invaded Ukraine, because of 3 years of a grinding war that has literally killed tens of thousands of Russian soldiers. And we don't even have any American boots on the ground, simply sending aid to Ukraine, which is a whole other very complex and nuanced discussion. And I would ask that you search the podcast Raging Moderates for the episode where Scott Galloway and Jessica Tarlov talk about this, because they break down the numbers and like what the cost that the U.S. has put in is actually quite minuscule related to our entire budget. And it has been like an incredible return on investment if you're talking about how Ukraine putting up a fight has like defanged Russia as a world superpower essentially. So no American boots on the ground, minimal, relatively speaking, investment, and the huge weakening of one of our biggest enemies.
Is this cathartic for you to be able to go down one by one?
Yes. It is. I only have one more. Sorry.
No.
It is.
In a way that you don't get to do with a family member in real life.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It's very cathartic. I'm sure we all have these experiences. And then finally, when the crime rates in American cities increased, you said nothing. Okay.
Oh my God.
According to the Council on Criminal Justice, as of January 2025, most violent crimes are at or below levels seen in 2019, the year before the COVID pandemic, and the racial justice protests of 2020. So there were 6% fewer homicides in the cities that were studied in 2024 than in 2019. Sexual assault was down 26%, domestic violence down 11%, and robbery down 19% in 2024 versus 2019. There were some crime rates that did go up. In fact, aggravated assaults were up 4%, gun assaults up 5%, and carjackings up 25%. So it's not great that those things are up, but talking about crime rates as a whole, that's not the whole story, and it's not even true. So maybe you felt that way watching news and you see like clips of some particularly heinous crime being played over and over and over again. You might think that the crime rate is going up in cities everywhere and it's all Joe Biden's fault because he's weak and old and whatever. But if you simply Google it, or read a story about it that has more than one sentence underneath the headline, you'll see it's just not true.
And so like the person who wrote that meme could have like taken just like one type of crime and said, oh, I'm going to generalize this and make a whole meme, which is shared to everybody's aunt on Facebook.
Yep, exactly.
Like,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, you could see how agitated I got just talking through that because it just boggles my mind that this is how we live. But
it's definitely not good for our mental health. Yeah. All of this loss of nuance online. Like, so the things that are more likely to be shared on social media, they're shocking. They're quick to be explained. It's like a burst of something that you're like, oh my God, okay, on to the next. It's just this immediate, it's not like gratification, but it's that immediate, like, either like the anger or, I mean, there's some cute puppies in there too, but like, we're scrolling through all of these huge, shocking things all day, one after another. And we don't take the time to pause and go into the intricacies and learn about them all. So we get used to this like instant gratification. And what that does is it just gives us a big dopamine boost, which feels good. And then we keep scrolling, and then that dopamine boost just drops, and we go looking for the next one. We want those like good chemicals. And like when the dopamine rush crashes, it's like coming down from a high. It doesn't feel good. It feels worse than before. And as we look for that next hit and the next and the next and become addicted to this short-term rush, we kind of lose the ability to look for those longer-term, more lasting fulfillments and rewards. So we end up having like a lower tolerance for things that are challenging or are uncomfortable. And these things are like necessary for a happy and successful life, a fulfilling life. The time it takes to research nuanced truths is like now like unbearable to us because we're relying on these sensationalized headlines just like pulsing through our brain and one right after the other. Owners of like media and tech companies know this about the human brain.
They know it.
And they're exploiting it for their monetary gain. So they're pushing these more sensationalized memes and stories and things on us into our feeds, into our algorithms, into the news cycles. Like we've already talked about the 24-hour news cycle. That's doing it to us too. But from here, we're kind of gonna cycle into like, what can we do? Like we as people need to put in a concerted effort to combat all of these factors that are, just working against us, that want us to forget about nuance, that want us to give into a simple, sensationalized information, whether it's right or not. Our capitalist overlords they're not going to make the changes that are good for humanity if it gets in the way of their bottom line.
No, they are not. And let me just really quick, as somebody who does social media marketing for a living right now, the algorithm it prioritizes, as it calls it, engagement, and nothing makes you engage more than something that makes you angry. So exactly everything Katie said is absolutely true.
So what can we do on a personal level to stop ourselves from falling into this cycle? Well, like the first thing obviously is like try to limit your social media, and it is hard.
It's hard.
I have been like trying to like not scroll social media before bed and read an actual book because one, I get better sleep, and two, I'm like my mind's not worrying at night. But it's hard, and I fall in and out of it. Like, you gotta try our best.
Gotta try our best. A big thing that I'm a huge proponent of, both because of my background and because of I just see it crumbling before our eyes is learning about news literacy and educating yourself in what that means and how to practice it in your real life. So what is news literacy? It's basically a suite of critical thinking skills and tools that you just have to develop personally to judge the reliability and credibility of news and information that you see online and on social, or even hear when you turn on the TV. I'm going to direct you to the News Literacy Project, which is, they have a social, they're at Newslit Project on Instagram. You can just go on to their website and just take a look. Look at their steps and tips and tricks, and just think about, like, when you're watching, and this is, on both sides. When you're watching your favorite talk show and they're just like talking and talking, whether it's Rachel Maddow or it's Jesse Waters on Fox, like, they each have their own perspective on things that are going to color what they say when they are analyzing the news. So just because it's their opinion does not make it fact. They are looking at the news through their own lens, just like we are. But if you are an educated consumer of news, then it's an opinion. Like, anything that's not specifically a news story is analysis, tends to be an opinion, especially if it's the person's own talk show or whatever. And whether you agree with their opinion is, that's up to you. That's your own personal
and
choice.
An opinion piece can be written in a way to allude to it being like
a fact.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's, I think, is a problem, that people just don't know the difference. And
another thing about, taking in your news sources is looking at, like, who owns the company? Where is this news coming from? So, like, if you look at something like NPR, is publicly funded. So they are not answering to, some sort of billionaire owner. But then you take, like, in contrast, the Washington Post is owned by Nash Holdings, which is a company owned by Jeff Bezos. So ultimately, they're going to be printing stories that this one guy wants them to print.
Yes, and there have been documented instances of that absolutely happening, and there have been lots of good journalists who have left the Washington Post because of that.
Another thing, like, it seems simple, but just being aware that, like, whatever post you see is probably a lot more complicated and nuanced than can fit in 2 sentences or a 1-minute TikTok or in a meme template. Like, take a minute or two to look up some information. Like, if something seems too good or too bad to be true, it probably is. Another thing you can do is work on, being open to the possibility of changing your mind, of admitting you might be wrong about something, even partially wrong. Like, how can you expect another person to change their mind and come to, your way of thinking if you're not open to that possibility for yourself?
Absolutely.
This next one is, like, I think the toughest one, at least for me, but just kind of having this viewpoint of, like, hopefully, even if somebody has a viewpoint that's harmful, they started their journey to get there with probably good intentions. Just like the ideas and stories and the news we read are complex, so are people. Can you try to see their thought process and where it came from? If you just brand somebody as the enemy right away, it's so much more convenient because it means that we don't have to engage with their ideas at all. How can we expect to change somebody's mind again if all we do is, like, call them evil? I mean, there's some people that we can call evil. But, the average Joe. Like, all those people who were misled into voting for Trump and now are upset about it. Like, we're going to need to convince people of the truth, and we have to, see their side. We have to figure out what led them to where they are and use that journey of theirs to help them see an alternative. How are we going to win if we're alienating the people we need to convince back to our side?
Definitely. And one point about that is thinking about it from this perspective as well. My gut reaction when I woke up on November 6th or whatever day it was, the day after the election, was America hates women and everyone who voted for Trump is a misogynist, because I was really upset. I really believed in Kamala Harris. And yes, I know her getting to that point was a whole flawed process, but I saw my values reflected in her, and I was very upset when she did not win. And, gut reaction, misogyny, racism, everyone hates women, etc. As time went on, I do think that those were all factors for some people, absolutely. Some people who would gleefully agree. But I do see, and we're getting a lot of data now. It just came out, I think, last week. There's an Ezra Klein podcast you can look up, but the Democrats need to take a hard look at why they lost, because it's not exactly as how it would appear. But not everybody voted because they hate women or whatever.
And certainly, no matter why they voted, it was an uninformed vote, but still.
Right, exactly. And a lot of people just voted because they couldn't afford their groceries. And honestly, it wasn't even so much a vote for Donald Trump as it was a vote against inflation that was happening under Joe Biden. And it's something that was happening across the world. This post-COVID spike in inflation saw many incumbent parties pushed out in the most recent slate of elections. And not everybody listens to the news as much as we do, or even is on social media as much as we are. And they literally went to the voting booth and they were like, things are not working for me right now. I'm going to try something else. And I don't pay attention. Maybe I don't even like Donald Trump at all, but I can't deal with this anymore. So
but Donald Trump said I wasn't going to have to put that second apple back in the refrigerator at the grocery store anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And whether or not they agree with him or whatever, they just thought he would bring change, and he certainly has, but not in the way he said he would. But that all aside, I guess my point to that whole tangent was that we have to make space for everybody and try to understand their points of view, unless it's heinous, in which case you fight back against it.
So, we're not trying to, say you have to make space for bigots and people who have wronged you.
No.
It's more of if you can kind of see the journey that led them to where they are, you can sort of use that to help convince them of actual facts
or just even different viewpoints.
With different viewpoints,
and leading with empathy, I think, is the bottom line there.
Yeah. And just got a couple more just suggestions that I thought of. Another thing is to try to build an awareness of your own automatic responses. So I'm just going to read a quote that I pulled from an article from Nest Labs. It says, whenever you find yourself jumping to conclusions because an answer seems obvious, take a few seconds to ask yourself whether your conclusion truly captures the nuances of the topic or if it's an automatic thought. It's especially important to manage our automatic responses when discussing topics where we may have deeply ingrained beliefs because of our personal experience. And talking about personal experience, making sure that you keep the idea that your own personal experience, that's anecdotal. It shouldn't be generalized to the larger population. Consider that scientific studies need a really large generalizable sample size to be considered valid. A case study is not considered evidence in any sort of scientific trial. So the same thing can be said for your experience. You and your friends might not engage in XYZ behaviors, but the majority of the population might,
Right.
In your own little bubble, that's not the whole world.
That helps me better funnel my thought about the greater population and how they vote in the election versus how we voted in the election. And again, let's all be clear, Donald Trump did not even win 50% of the popular vote.
Yeah.
But my point is that people who went to the voting booth that day, for you and me, we think it's obvious.
Yeah.
Everything that we consumed as people on social media, reading the news, we thought it was obvious what the choice was. But there are swaths of people who don't go on Instagram every day, or might not even have an Instagram account. Just everyday people. They don't turn on the news. They're just literally. I wish sometimes that I could be a person who's not on social media and doesn't pay attention to the news.
Not in the cards for you.
Literally, they don't have all this context.
Yeah, I don't usually go on social media, but I'm I don't know if I can say this on Spotify or wherever, but I'm an NPR slut.
That's fine. And yeah, exactly. Things that you and your friends do not extrapolate across the United States. If I don't know, other people have lives where they're working 12-hour shifts and they don't have their phone on them, and they shouldn't have their phone on them due to their line of work, and they're just not obsessing over every piece of every news cycle. And they went into the voting booth
thinking that they're having trouble
grocery prices,
affording breakfast. Yeah.
And they want to change, and it can be as simple as that, because Because think of all the terrible things that we don't like when Donald Trump says them. They may not have filtered down to that person who is not always online.
And again, like these people are kind of like falling victim to like all of these things stacked against us. Like all of these giant tech companies feeding us these like quick, incorrect most of the time, like sensationalized little tidbits.
Right.
And that's the stuff that gets filtered down to people who, might have gone in and voted for Donald Trump because of this uninformed opinion.
Right.
They might not have realized what social media is showing them is not the truth or not the whole truth.
And voting because of grocery prices is in itself an unnuanced thing because presidents don't control grocery prices. So we can talk about that all day.
But instead of that, let's talk about what are we making time for this week?
Yes.
Because we don't have time for this. But it's important to make time for some things in life that are good. Yep. So Caitlin, what are you making time for this week?
So this week I am making time for exercise. I went to the gym for the first time since my daughter was born 7 months ago. And it was literally the 1 hour since then that I haven't thought about Donald Trump or Elon Musk. And it gave me a little clarity. And I hope to do more of it because I need to step away.
Absolutely. My thing that I made time for this week is also sort of was a way to distract my mind and step away. I decided to do a little sewing project this week. A friend of the family, elderly mother, passed away last year, and she donated a bunch of to my art therapy business a bunch of like beautiful laces and finishings and like all of these fringes, like vintage things. So I took some red fringe and I cropped up a cheap $5 Godzilla t-shirt that I had and I added red fringe to the bottom, and I'm so excited to wear it. I should have worn it today.
Well, we'll have to snap a photo and put it on our Instagram once we get our social channels up and running.
Woohoo! That is our first episode.
Thanks for bearing with us as we learn how to podcast.
And if we're on any sort of place that you can leave a comment, do it.
Yeah, we welcome all feedback. And we will keep this discussion going.
Heck yeah. All right. Well, on that note, I'm Katie.
And I'm Caitlin.
And this is Who Has Time for This?
We don't.